Okay, so when you think of Martin Luther, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably that famous image, right? The defiant monk, hammer in hand, nailing his 95 Theses to a church door. But that's really only half the story. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of the history books and really get to know the man behind the movement. The husband, the father, and, the actual human being.
So you've got these two kind of competing images of Luther. On one side, you have the theological giant, the guy who stared down an entire empire. And on the other, well, he was a husband and a dad whose house was literally a brewery. I mean, how do those two things even connect? That's exactly what we're going to dig into.
All right, so here's the game plan. We're going to look at his totally revolutionary marriage, get a feel for his chaotic family life at a place called the Black Cloister, walk through his final days, and see how his very last words ended up being maybe the most powerful summary of everything he believed. Let's start with one of Luther's most radical personal acts, getting married. And this was so much more than a private decision. It was a public, in-your-face challenge to 1,000 years of church tradition. Now, to really get how shocking this was, you have to understand clerical celibacy. For centuries, we're talking 1,000 years, this was a cornerstone of the priesthood, a hard and fast rule. So for a priest, let alone a former monk, to get married, it was completely unthinkable. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the church itself. And get this, he didn't just marry anyone. He married Katharina von Bora, a woman who was every bit as rebellious as he was. I mean, she was a former nun. Inspired by his teachings, she actually escaped her convent. The story goes she hid in empty fish barrels to get out. So their marriage, it was basically a partnership of two absolute rebels.
And for all the controversy surrounding their marriage, it seems it was a genuinely loving one. Luther had this wonderful, affectionate nickname for his wife Katie, the Morning Star of Wittenberg. It just gives you a glimpse of the warmth and real respect they had for each other.
Their home was a former monastery, the Black Cloister, and it basically became the ground zero for this whole new idea of family life. It wasn't just a place to live, it was the blueprint for what a Protestant pastor's household could look like. And let me tell you, Katharina was so much more than a wife. She was an absolute powerhouse of a manager. She was running the whole operation, a brewery, a farm, a boarding house for students, and she handled all the money. She was basically the CEO of a mid-sized business, all while raising a family.
And what a family. Martin and Katharina had 6 children together. 6. That number alone just shatters the image of Luther as some solitary scholar locked away with his books. You have to picture a big, loud, bustling household.
But that life also came with incredible sorrow. Luther was a deeply devoted father, and when his daughter Magdalena died at just 13, it absolutely crushed him. This tragedy really shows you the human heart of the great reformer, wrestling with a kind of grief that would profoundly shape his later ideas on faith and suffering.
Their house was always packed, and dinner at the Luthers was, well, it was an event. Students, guests, everyone would gather around the table, and the conversations about everything from dense theology to politics to jokes were so legendary that people actually wrote them down. This table talk is an amazing, unfiltered look right into Luther's mind.
All right, let's shift gears now to the end of Luther's life. Even though his health was failing, he stayed active right up to the very end. His death wasn't really a surprise. It felt more like a conscious final chapter, the culmination of the very faith he'd spent his life preaching. And this timeline just shows you how active he was. In January of 1546, he travels to Eisleben, his hometown, to help settle a dispute. And he does. He succeeds. Then just a couple weeks later, on February 18th, he has a fatal heart attack. He was working as a reformer and a peacemaker until his last breath.
So, in his last conscious hours, his good friend Justus Jonas leans in close and asks him this one critical question. This was it, the final test. After everything, would he stand by the teachings that had literally split the Christian world? His entire life's work came down to this one moment.
And his answer was just a single whispered word: yes. So simple, so clear, so unwavering. With that one word, he confirmed everything he had ever fought for. The power of that moment is just incredible.
But that quiet yes wasn't his only final message. After he died, they found a little scrap of paper in his pocket, and written on it were a few words that might just be the most perfect summary of his entire theology.
We are all beggars. That is the truth. Just think about that. Those were his last written words. Not some triumphant declaration, but a statement of complete and total humility. It's this profound recognition that we are all completely dependent on God's grace.
And right here is where all the dots connect. That final thought, we are all beggars, is the most human way to express his core theological doctrine, sola fide, or justification by faith alone. The idea that we can't earn our way to salvation, we can only receive it as a gift, just like a beggar receives charity.
And then, in a final, poetic act of coming full circle, Luther's body was brought back to Wittenberg. He was buried in the Castle Church, the very same church where, 29 years earlier, he had posted the 95 Theses and kicked off the entire Reformation. The beginning and the end, all in the same place.
So it leaves us with this big question, doesn't it? Luther's story shows us a man whose radical ideas were completely intertwined with his radical life choices. Marrying a nun, raising 6 kids, turning a monastery into a home. It really makes you wonder, can you truly have a revolution in what you believe without also having a revolution in how you actually live your life?